Okay, so today's video is about graphs. So here's a list of vocabulary words we're going to cover today. First is line graph, then bar graph, circle graph, double bar graph, interval, and scale. So first, a line graph is a graph that connects points to show how data changes over time. That is the most important part, how data changes over time. So if you're showing how something changes from day to day or minute to minute, you're going to want to use a line graph. Your time frame always goes on the x-axis at the bottom, and the amount of change always goes on the side or the y-axis. Our next graph is a bar graph. You're probably very familiar with these. It's a graph that uses bars to show and compare data. So a bar graph you're going to use when you want to compare something. So if you're comparing the number of scholars in each pod, then you would want to use a bar graph to show that. On a circle graph or pie chart, you should add up to 100%. The next one is double bar graph. So this is a bar graph that uses two different colored or shaded bars to show two similar sets of data. So it's going to have different categories, but it will have different numbers within that category. So you may have boys and girls, and then within the boys you have 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And then in the girls you have 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So that would actually be a triple bar graph. So you can have multiple bars showing different information for different groups. And again, you would use this to compare data. Our next word is interval. It is the difference between adjoining numbers on an axis of a graph. So your interval will normally go on your y-axis, which is the one that goes up and down on the side. And the thing with interval is that you get to pick what your interval is. So if you want to count by twos, you can go 0, 2, 4, 6, 8 up the side of the graph. You can count by ones, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the side of the graph. Or you can count by fives. You could go 0, 10, 15, 20, 25 on the side of the graph. The thing you need to keep in mind is that your interval should always stay the same. So if you choose to count by twos, you should always count by twos. So every single line on the side on your y-axis should go up by 2 numbers. You also want to make sure that the numbers that you pick make sense. So if the biggest number on your graph is 150, you may not want to count by ones because it will take you 150 lines to get to the top. So pick an interval that makes sense and just make sure you keep staying with the same number. All right, our next word is scale, and it is a series of numbers at equal intervals along an axis on a graph. So here this one is counting by fives. Scale also means the size of the graph. So again, if the largest number on your graph is 150, you want to make sure that you're able to count on the side up to 150. If the tallest number, or the biggest number on your graph is 10, there's no reason for your graph to go up to 70. There's just no reason because the majority of your graph would be blank. So you want to pick a scale that makes sense, that it covers all of your numbers, but doesn't go so high that a good chunk of your graph is blank. Pages, and we don't normally talk about histograms, but I kind of like how this shows the difference between a histogram and a bar graph. So a histogram is a type of bar graph that groups data into equal intervals shown on the horizontal axis, which is the x-axis, and there is no space between the bars. I will have an example of that in just a moment. So this is an example of a histogram. So if you notice on the x-axis on the bottom, it has a range of numbers and not just one category. So we have a range of numbers from 0 to 2, from 3 to 5, from 6 to 8, and from 9 to 11. So this graph shows us that 2 students bought somewhere between 0 and 2 books. The thing with a histogram, it doesn't give us specific information. So we don't know, those two students could have bought 0 books, or both of them could have bought 2 books, or maybe one scholar bought 0 books and one scholar bought 1 book. It's really kind of hard to tell. We just know that there were 2 students who bought between 0 and 2 books. And then we can also see that there were 8 scholars that bought between 9 and 11 books. And again, we don't know specifically how many books they bought, but we can see the range. So here it says how many students were surveyed. And so we would add up the total of each bar. So our first bar has 2 students, our second bar has 6 students, our third bar has 4 students, and our fourth bar has 8 students. So 2 plus 6 plus 4 plus 8 equals 20. So you know that there were a total of 20 students who were surveyed. So then it says how many bought more than 5 books. So you need to look at the third and fourth bars, because that's the range from 6 to 8 books and 9 to 11 books. So there are 4 scholars who bought between 6 and 8, and there were 8 scholars who bought between 9 and 11. So you have 4 plus 8 equals 12. So 12 of those 20 bought more than 5 books. And then here it says what fraction of the students bought less than 6 books. That would be, there's a total of 20, so that would go on your bottom. There were 8 students who bought fewer than 6 books. So that would go on the top, and then that can reduce down to 2/5. But I'm not too worried about the fraction if you don't understand that quite yet. Category is circle graphs, and remember this can also be called a pie chart. I will normally call it a pie chart because that's what I was taught to call them. So this shows how 100% of a set of data has been divided into parts, and each part is shown by a wedge or sector of the circle. So here it's saying compare the circle graphs. So the graph on the left has 5 parts. 2 of those parts are shaded, and so your fraction is 2 out of 5. So to find the percentage, you would do 2 over 5 times 100, which equals 40%. And again, if you're not quite sure on the math parts, that's okay, because Mr. Johnson will go over this with you in class at some point this year. The graph on the right has 4 parts. 2 of them are shaded. The fraction is 2 out of the 4, which is equivalent to 1 over 2. Half of 100 is 50%. So circle graphs are great for showing percents because a circle represents 100%. Line graphs are often used to show a trend or general direction in data. So here it's going to show us the minutes practicing the piano. And so on day 1, the person practiced for 6 minutes. On day 2, the person practiced for 8 minutes. And remember, I said that line graphs show how something changes over time. So this chart would be great to put in a line graph because it shows how the number of minutes that we practice piano changes each day. So here we kind of plotted those points. So what you do is you go over to day 1, you go up to the 2, and that shows us how many minutes we practice each day. So for each of these points, we could connect the dots and kind of make a line graph that has points and valleys, like it goes up and down. Or you can also kind of do this line that kind of fits the middle and kind of shows you an average of those numbers. So here it says practice time has increased over the days. So on average, this person is practicing more and more and more as time goes by. A couple of types. There's a regular bar graph. It uses rectangles or bars to show and compare data. And a double bar graph, which uses 2 different colored or shaded bars to show 2 similar sets of data. So here we have a double bar graph, and it's showing us 2 different categories for each grade. So for 3rd grade, there's a bar for the number of scholars that walk, and there's also a bar for the number of scholars that take the bus. And then for 4th and 5th grade, we're doing the same thing. So here it says how many 4th graders walk to school. And so you're going to look at the middle 2 bars. You're going to look at the darker of the 2 because that's the walk bar. And you're going to see that it goes up to the line for 20. So there are 20 4th graders who walk to school. The second question says, which 2 groups show the greatest difference? And so anytime you see that word difference, you're going to want to think subtract. So you know you're going to be subtracting something. Okay, so let's look at the greatest difference. Our first one is the third graders. Because there are 30 third graders who walk to school, and there are 50 third graders that take the bus to school, which is a difference of 20. Okay, so that has a difference of 20. And then the fourth graders, there are 20 fourth graders that walk and 10 fourth graders that take the bus. So that's a difference of 10.